So I want to talk a bit about the Compressor Plus in Bitwig Studio 5.2 Beta 1, and there are some concepts around this, or some, let's say, some confusing things around Compressor Plus, and I want to talk a bit about it because there's no clear documentation and we have to rely on some experiments how this actually works. So Compressor Plus is, in my opinion, not a multi-band compressor. It's just a single band compressor. Even though we have here 4 bands, we can change the intensity and the timing on it, but it's still a single band compressor. We have also here some modes, and one of these modes is called Prism, clean blend of multi and single band compression. Even this mode, I think it's just a single band compression mode. So let's put this here to clear. And we have here as an input a test tone, which is just pink noise. I can show you this here. Right, just pink noise, and we go into Compressor Plus here, and then into the EQ Plus here. Maybe I bring up the gain a bit more until we scratch here basically the threshold. So something like this. And okay, so now we have no gain reduction basically. So there's nothing here catching basically some of the waves with the threshold. So what we can do now is we can pull down one of these bands. So let's say here the low band, right? So we change the intensity, we pull this down. You can see we have now here a lot of gain reduction and not so much in all the other bands. Just a tad here in all the other bands, but here the most, right? But in all the other bands, you can see the waveform reacts to it also, right? So it's a bit confusing. On one hand, we have basically 4 bands, or it looks like 4 bands, and we can change the timing and intensity on all of these 4 bands. But the waveform display is actually single band, because it's just the same in all of these 4 bands here, or it looks like it, at least to me. And also we reduce only the volume, or we have gain reduction only in the low band, but you can see here it's still a pink noise curve. So there's no dip in here, right? So we don't reduce actually just one band. So we can release this here. We can also maybe bring the intensity here down. You can see we have gain reduction only here, but the waveform goes down in all of these bands, and also the sum or the output of the Compressor Plus goes down in the whole frequency range, or over across the whole frequency range. So it's a single band compressor actually, but you can react to different frequencies differently. And I can show you this here also. Instead of using a test, a pink noise, we can use here sine, and we can use here different frequencies. So now we have here a sine wave, pretty low actually, not just 1 hertz. But you can see here it's still in all of these bands the same. This should not be true for a band splitting, right? You should see something different on top here. But this is just the same waveform basically in all of these bands. But now we go up here with the frequency. And at some point we should hit basically this band here. You can see we start actually here, right? So we target basically only this band. But we go down in volume in all of the other bands. Also, you can see this line here. Right, so we go out of this band range, or this threshold range here, and then we also release the gain on all of the other bands. So it's a bit confusing. It looks like it's a multi-band compressor, but it's actually not. You have only a multi-band in the analyzer part, and you analyze basically your sounds or your audio, and then you can react to different frequencies with a single band differently. So this is maybe useful if you have drums, right? And you want to react to the snare with a single band compressor differently than to the kick drum or something like this. But it's a bit hard to actually dial in the right amounts, maybe, because you can see I have here some drums running. Sounds like this. Right, so I want to react to the kick drum, but I can't see in which band the kick drum actually is, because this is just here the single band output of the compressor, or input, I don't know. So it would be nice in one of the next betas actually to see only the waveform of these bands. because or what I know is that also some of these modes here, vanilla, smooth, over, and so on, also here these VCA modes, have different crossover points, and you can't define the crossover points here manually. They are predefined, which I'm okay with. I'm all for, you know, let's put it on and look how it sounds. Does it sound great? Then I leave it on. If it sounds bad, then I, you know, change the settings or maybe use a different device. So I'm okay with this, but it would be nice to actually see here to what you react with these threshold lines in these individual bands. So you can see here basically the drums look the same in all of these bands. So it would be nice to see only the kick drum here, right? Or the upper parts of the kick drum here. And then you see, oh, the snare is in here, right? On the hi-hats are in here. And so I just can only guess, and I need to trust my ears. Maybe that's the whole point of this compressor. I don't know. So I have to trust my ears and dial in here the settings and use my ears for it, and yeah, dial in different timings and then threshold settings or intensity settings for these different sounds on the drums. Yeah, that's one part. I think that's one important part actually. So it's not a multi-band compressor, so you can put it on some sounds and it doesn't split up the sounds into multiple bands, and you don't have phase issues or something like this. Another confusing part was actually here the gain reduction meter that usually shows you how much gain reduction you apply when something hits the threshold. But here it's a bit different. Here you can see the difference between the input and the output. And you can see here it's actually positive, even though we have some gain reduction happening here with the threshold, right? You can see here the compressor pulls down some of the gains or some of the peaks, but we have here still something positive. And that's because the input is actually higher than the output. So I use here the input to push it basically into the compressor or against the threshold, and then we have basically a positive output. So we can counter this, or maybe this is actually not how it's supposed to be. So some people argue that it would be better to actually show the gain reduction, so what the compressor actually reduces from the point of the threshold and not from the input and the output. But I'm not really sure, because here you can really see how much you change the signal when you apply or when you use the compressor. You can really see I push the input, right? And I have here actually increased the gain by 8 dB, something like this. So I'm not really sure. Maybe it would be nice to have here a switch or something here in the inspector where you can change this, how the gain reduction is actually measured. So yeah, maybe that's something for the next betas. So that's a point of confusion for some people I read in the Discord over the recent days. Okay. Also, an interesting fact is that you can use this actually, or this compressor you can use it as a limiter. So here we have basically the ratio in 1 to infinity, which is basically a limiter. So it brings down the volume always, or tries to bring the volume always down flat to the threshold. So it sounds like this here on the drums. Maybe I pull down the makeup here so it's a bit quieter. And because you can dial down here the attack to 0 ms and also the release to 0 ms, it's basically more like it's not a clipper, it's actually a limiter. It's a pretty hard limiter. So the knee is also at 0%, so it's a hard clipper, more or less like a hard limiter. If you push this up here to 0 dB, or let's mute this actually here. If you go with the threshold here, so let's say 0 dB, right, and you push the drums into the threshold here, of course it leaks out here, right? It goes above 0, but this is expected because you have, you know, true peak anyway on your audio output and also because of the oversampling, and probably also here with the VCA modes, right? It brings in some coloring, it adds some harmonics on top, so you have additional gain then at the output. But you can still see here I'm pushing this pretty hard, and then we have only here go above 0 with 3 dB. So this is more or less like also a clipper if you want to use it in this way, but you can actually. That's maybe important to know. What I also found interesting is that these VCA modes here, let's say we dial in saturate, moving analog feel like tape with a mid-range bump on compression. Some of these VCA modes sound much better if you actually drive the input higher instead of pulling down the threshold. So there is probably some kind of threshold in here, or let's say if you increase the input, it reacts differently than pulling down the threshold. So maybe you can bring this down here a bit. So we have here saturate, right? Nothing is applied, no gain reduction. Now we push this here against, maybe open this up a bit. So my opinion, sometimes if you use the input here and drive the compressor plus pretty hard with the input, these VCA modes or VCA color modes sound different than by just pulling down the threshold. Maybe you make some experiments with this, but I found it works pretty well with some drums. So you can bring in a lot of coloring. And also maybe if you don't want to color too much, keep in mind that changing the input is different than bringing down the threshold, even though technically it does the same thing, right? But I found it sounds much dirtier by bringing in here input or driving the compressor plus pretty hard. Also here, the auto timing is pretty smooth in my opinion if you change here the modes. Actually, so what this does is basically you change the mode not for the compressor, you change it for the auto timing. So if you have the auto timing at 0%, you can change here what you want. I think it doesn't do much difference, right? It's not a difference. You have to use the auto timing. So these are the modes basically for auto timing. So if you want to over compress, right, and then you bring in auto timing up, and then it changes basically attack and release settings. Let's try this out here. But you can see, you can still influence here how the compressor acts with attack and release. But the auto timing basically gives you probably a different starting point to attack and release. I haven't analyzed here the attack and release times with the auto timing, not that precise. I just, you know, looked here at the gain reduction and you can see how it works. You can see here I have release on 0 and attack on 0, but we still have here a pretty long release, right? So if I pull this down, you can see it's much shorter, right? Or you can see this also here. It reacts much faster to changes. So these auto timing modes here basically give you a different starting point, or it changes how attack and release basically works. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's also not very well documented, so you can only guess, and you probably have to trust your ears, bro. That's basically the point of all of this. Yeah, I also find it pretty interesting to use after the Compressor Plus to use the new Over clipper. And here with Over, I'm using basically 0 dB. And I'm also using a BCM clipper with 0 minus 0.3 dB. And then I basically can push here also into the clipper if I want to, right? So this is also possible. So I can drive basically here the Compressor Plus with the input pretty hard. Then I make use here of the overtones from the VCR coloration. And then I can use makeup gain and push this into the clipper against 0 dB if I want to. Right, and it doesn't go over 0 dB here, it stays on minus 0.3. So this is how I used basically Compressor Plus and Over in combination. I really like to compress with this. It sounds really nice. It also brings a lot of color into it. It also makes drums pretty groovy in my opinion. For drum and bass, it's really nice. Also, it's very good that you have here the attack time, release time go down to 0 dB. You have over compression, or you can limit basically. Then you have here, you can switch dual. Sometimes I do this and use lift to bring up some quiet sounds in between, you know, the snare and the kick and so on. That's pretty nice. And then use this in combination here with over, having this on 0 dB, and then you can press basically with the makeup gain everything into the clipper and make it super extra loud. I have some more tutorials and some more ideas for these things in the future, but I don't want to make this video too overcomplicated. I just wanted to give out some thoughts about this. Basically tell you it's not a multi-band compressor. It's really nice to limit stuff with it, how it reacts to different frequencies, and how you can combine it with an over clipper here of the new Bitwig Studio 5.2 beta. So I'm really a big fan of over at the moment. Some people discovered it takes up a lot of CPU power, or much more CPU power than a VST, but in my opinion it sounds pretty great. There's also here a multi-band included, so you can tilt basically. It's not like a frequency tilt or an EQ. It's more like where it clips more the high end or more the low end. And sometimes it's really nice to get the kick drum out of the clipper and only clip the tops, right? Because in my opinion, these hard clippers don't sound good on kick drums or on bass sounds. It brings in way too much overtones. So I usually want to clip only, you know, some of the tops, so 300 hertz and upwards and so on. There it sounds pretty great, also on percussions and so on. So yeah, it's pretty great to have actually here a tilt in there. So then I go basically for multi-blend to 100% and then I tilt until it sounds good. Maybe I can do this too here on the drums. So in my opinion, this sounds much cleaner than this one, right? So you can bring out certain frequencies out of the clipper and only clip different frequencies. Sometimes it's also interesting to use here this delta mode. Let's see if I can explain this here shortly. So let's say we have some, you know, some stuff we clip out here of the signal. And usually this is just a transient of the drums, the kick drum and the snare drum, right? Of the first transient basically. So you can use this to not only clip stuff away, the transients, but also maybe get transients from certain sounds, cut it out and combine it with other drums, right? So it's more or less like, yeah, something where you can exchange the transients with other transients or something like this. This is possible, or I did this recently on the weekend. I have not a perfect example for this right now. It's also interesting for ambient stuff here when you use, let's say, a test tone, right? And we have here, what's this? We have, let's say, pink noise. You can create nice crackles also for vinyl simulations of stuff like this. So only a few bits of this test noise basically peaks over the threshold line, and because we have delta, we only hear these peaks. So you can make nice little rain simulations, or maybe for ambient, right, rain, or let's say you want to create some lo-fi effects and you want to put some tape crackle or some vinyl crackle on top. This is perfectly nice for this. I did some experiments with this over the weekend, so it's pretty nice. But again, I do some videos on these specific things probably too in the future, but I want to show you basically some rough ideas. And let's go here to on it. Let's use here the polymer synthesizer, and let's use here a node grid. So inside the node grid here, we have basically this new shift register thing. That's pretty interesting how it works. I can show you this here in a small example. So let's say we have 4 output lines here. So we can use a trigger, and we can use, let's say, read out. Actually, we want to use here nodes. So just duplicate this. Or let's not use a trigger. Let's use here a gate input. Let's disconnect this here. So every time we press a key, we want to trigger this, and we want to save basically the note, the current pitch, right? So let's say I press a key on my keyboard. Let's say I'm pressing here D sharp, right? You can see D sharp is now in here. Out of this output jack, we have D sharp 4. So now I press another note. Let's say I'm using here F sharp, right? Watch what happens to this note when I press F sharp. So this becomes F sharp, and the next output now is D sharp. So it just shifts basically the register. So the new note goes into the first slot, and the old note goes into the next slot every time we press basically a key. So now I'm pressing here, what's this, A sharp. So now this becomes A sharp, this becomes F sharp, and this becomes D sharp 4. You can see. And my idea was, hey, you can actually build a nice step sequencer with this, right? So we can just do that. So we can push this up here to 8. And I also just duplicate this here so we have an idea how this works. And then use a merge. And also 8 output. So we connect here this. And all we have to do then is basically more or less step through this here. So we use a counter. You can do this in any shape or form, but I use a counter here with 8 steps. And I use a trigger, or triggers, that's the name, right? And I want to trigger this here every 4th node. You can see we scan basically through this merge module. And I use interpolation nearest, so we skip or quantize here basically the steps. And on each slot we get a different note, right? Because we input this here into this shift register, and we get here the note, and we output the note, and we also output here the trigger. Right, so now I can press basically multiple keys on my keyboard and input this here into the shift register or my melody. right? So we have now in every slot here some kind of note, and we have a melody. Maybe I make this a bit faster here. Maybe use here a convolution reverb and a delay. And this runs and runs, and you have, let's say you have a live act, right? And you want to change the melody, so you can now use the keyboard and shift and push a new note into the sequence at the top, right? Let's say a bass note, D sharp, right? We have a bass note now in there. And another note. So the problem for me now is, every time I press a key, everything in here shifts downwards, right? The problem with this is that we play basically here one slot, one pitch, then we press a note, and then this one skips to the next, which is the same note because we shift in this moment, right? So you have always the same note twice. Right, this, or... And every time you press a note, basically you shift this down and then it plays the note twice, which is a bit, you know, it's okay. It's not that big of a problem. But I thought maybe you can use the gate output and reset basically the counter. So you start from the beginning of this. So you also shift the melody around. So let's press a note. Right? So you restart the whole melody, you shift in a new note and you restart the whole sequence. So this is probably really nice for, let's say, live acts, live improvisations and so on. You can also use sample and hold here. Sadly, it's only 8 slots you can choose. Would be nice to have 16. Also with merge, 16 would be nice. Maybe they can increase this in the future to have a 16-step sequencer. But if you want to use more, you have to, you know, combine this with multiple modules and then a bit of routing, a bit of logic and so on. It's not a big problem, but it would be nice to actually just increase this here to 16 and then, you know, have a 16-step sequencer. But yeah, it's really nice for melodies inside of the note grid here. It's kind of a step, what's the name? Step recording, step sequencing. It's pretty fun actually. And it's perfectly in sync because we use triggers here, and triggers is synchronized to the phase signal of the transport. So it's always in sync. So it's perfect, basically. Yeah, these are some of the experiments I did on the weekend. I want to show you this. Maybe give it a try. Compressor Plus, in my opinion, it's a pretty nice addition, even though a lot of people probably have their own compressor VSTs. But for me, it's pretty helpful because I share a lot of projects on Patreon. And then I don't have to use, of course, all the VSTs, and people just can open up the project. It's pretty nice this way. Also, the compressor itself sounds pretty dope. Also with the additions of the VCA coloring modes. Over is pretty dope. I don't have to use my hard clip preset anymore. And it's not like that I use hard clipping on every track, on every channel. I reduced this in the last year up or down to, let's say, only the drum bus and maybe the master, maybe on the snare. So maybe 3 or 4 max, at max 5 instances of a hard clipper inside of a big project. I think it's pretty fine. So I'm pretty happy about Over and Compressor Plus and also some of the additions inside of the grid. And the GPU update is also pretty dope. I think for just a small update from from 0.1 to 0.2, it's actually a lot of content in there. So I'm pretty happy about it, and I'm pretty pumped for the next updates. So yeah, that's it for my Bitwig shilling for today. Thanks for watching. Leave a thumbs up if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe subscribe to my Patreon if you want to. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next video.